My grandmother listened to the exact same broken radio every single evening for 43 years, never once letting anyone touch it, repair it, or even move it from its precise spot on her windowsill. When she passed last month, I finally opened the back panel to see why she'd refused every offer to fix it, and found a false compartment holding letters addressed to a name I genuinely never once heard mentioned throughout my entire childhood. The letters were tied together with faded ribbon, dozens of them, all addressed to someone named Thomas, and all returned unopened, stamped address unknown, in official postal ink across every single envelope, spanning decades of attempted contact that had apparently never once successfully reached its intended recipient throughout my grandmother's entire adult life together. I opened the oldest letter carefully, my hands trembling slightly as decades-old paper crackled softly beneath my fingers. It was dated the same year my grandmother married my grandfather, addressed to a man she apparently loved desperately before that marriage, someone she'd been separated from suddenly and never properly explained to anyone throughout the rest of her entire, seemingly ordinary life. I called my mother immediately, reading portions aloud over the phone, watching her confusion slowly transform into something considerably more complicated as pieces of an entirely unknown history began assembling themselves together for the very first time. "I've genuinely never heard that name," my mother admitted quietly. "She never once mentioned anyone before your grandfather, not once. The radio itself, I realized examining it further, wasn't actually broken at all. It was permanently tuned to one single specific frequency, a small local station that had stopped broadcasting decades earlier, according to a quick search, the exact frequency where Thomas had apparently once worked as a young radio announcer before whatever separation occurred between them originally happened. She'd kept that radio permanently tuned to his old broadcasting frequency for 43 entire years, listening to nothing but static every single evening, apparently finding some strange comfort in that connection to a life she'd never actually gotten to properly live alongside him throughout her own extended lifetime afterward. I tracked down local historical society records, discovering Thomas had actually died only 12 years after their apparent separation, decades before my grandmother herself eventually passed away peacefully. She'd spent 31 additional years faithfully listening to silence, seemingly unaware the man she'd loved had already been gone considerably longer than she'd ever actually realized. His obituary, buried in old newspaper archives, mentioned a wife and children I'd never have expected existed, meaning Thomas had apparently moved on entirely himself, while my grandmother remained faithfully devoted to a connection that had genuinely already ended completely from his particular side of things decades earlier than she'd ever known or suspected. I found his surviving daughter through those same archives, an elderly woman herself now, who'd never once heard her own father mention anyone named after my grandmother throughout her entire childhood memories of him. Two women, connected through one man's apparently separate, entirely unconnected chapters of an otherwise ordinary, complicated life neither had ever fully understood themselves. I never learned exactly what separated my grandmother and Thomas originally, whether family disapproval, circumstance, or something else entirely lost now to time, and unopened letters, returned repeatedly without explanation. Some mysteries, I've realized, simply outlive everyone capable of actually explaining them properly, leaving only static and old letters as evidence something significant once genuinely existed. I kept the radio, still tuned to that same silent frequency, sitting now on my own windowsill, exactly where hers once sat for over 4 decades of quiet devotion. Do you think my grandmother was tragically loyal, or should she have eventually moved forward emotionally instead of holding on to something already gone? Comment loyal or should have moved on below, and subscribe for more true family secret stories.